Hey everybody, welcome back to the Catholic Culture Podcast. I'm Thomas Miras. Today's guest is my co-worker at CatholicCulture.org, Phil Lawler. Phil is a veteran Catholic journalist and the founder of Catholic World News, which was the first English-language Catholic news service operating online. He founded it in 1995, and in 2003, it became part of CatholicCulture.org. Phil has just retired as editor of Catholic World News, though he'll still be writing commentary for Catholic Culture as well as on his personal Substack. Aside from his work with Catholic World News and Catholic Culture, Phil has served in the past as Director of Studies for the Heritage Foundation, editor of Crisis Magazine, editor of the Boston Archdiocesan newspaper, The Pilot, and for 12 years, editor of Catholic World Report. He's written or edited a dozen books, perhaps the best known being The Faithful Departed, an analysis of the decline of the church in Boston due to the sex abuse scandals. He also has a history in politics, including a run for U.S. Senate against Senator Edward Kennedy in the year 2000. I wanted to mark the occasion of Phil's retirement as our news editor by having him on to talk about his long career as a Catholic journalist, how things have changed, what stayed the same, and the present state of the Catholic press. Phil, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a good time to have this conversation.
Indeed, yeah. Well, I'm going to ask a really basic question that anybody would ask: is how did you end up becoming a journalist in the first place?
Well, I was in graduate school on a PhD track in political theory, which is still a keen interest of mine. And I realized I didn't really like the university life that much, and I did like writing. And people liked what I wrote. So that was the first thing that happened that turned me towards journalism. And what turned me towards Catholic journalism is actually a sort of funny story that while I was at the Heritage Foundation, I was given every encouragement to write, and I was writing a good deal about economics. In fact, I think to this day, the piece of mine, the op-ed piece that has been the most widely circulated, is a piece that I did explaining the basic principles of supply-side economics. And I thought, this is fine, I'll write about economics. Around the same time, I was, I guess, deepening my Catholic faith. Well, to be honest, returning to the Catholic faith after years AWOL. But also getting deeper into it. And I wrote a few things about the faith, and I found that editors were calling me, asking me to write more about Catholicism. Now, the irony here is that when I was writing about economics, I was telling people you've got to listen to what the marketplace tells you. And the marketplace was telling me to write about Catholic affairs. So I started doing that. That's how it all began.
So you were at Heritage. So when did your first official sort of long-term or stable job in Catholic journalism start?
Oh, well, that would be Crisis Magazine. Was the first time I was clearly identifying myself as a journalist and not as some sort of hybrid journalist activist.
And what year did Crisis start originally?
I'm very bad at dates, but I'm going to say it was 1983, 1982. It was around the time when the U.S. bishops were preparing their pastoral letter on nuclear weapons. Okay. It was started by Ralph McInerney and Michael Novak, and they ran it sort of out of their back pockets for a number of months, and then asked me if I would be willing to take over the editorial direction.
Well, I ask because it might be interesting to people just as a tangent. I mean, Crisis, it was a physical magazine, yes, back in the day. And I mean, it would have had to be in the 80s, right? So,
right.
Yeah. And you know, I don't know if it was always this way, but there were different periods in Crisis. I mean, you go on their archives and you can find all sorts of interesting sort of like high arts coverage, for instance, of the kind that doesn't really happen at Crisis today. What I'm saying is that it's had very different characters at different periods. Yes. I don't know if there's just two sort of main periods for the type of magazine, the type of outlet it was, but I find that very interesting because, in a sense, you look at the kind of stuff they used to have. It seems like a gap that is still kind of unfilled in a way in some of their cultural coverage back.
That's an interesting observation. I think any magazine takes on the imprint of its editor, and a good editor has a strong imprint. And there have been several editors over the years. As it turned out, I didn't stay there long because I was offered another job that was very attractive to me at the time. But you remind me that a few years after that, I was working in Catholic World Report as editor, and the publisher, Father Fessio, and I had a lot of discussions about what sort of articles we should be printing. And we finally landed on the conclusion that we should be publishing the sort of articles that we would like to read. And so what you read in the magazine tells you a lot about the editor one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, you can go back to the old days in the 90s, for instance, and find reviews of all kinds of European art films. And Terry Teachout used to write for Crisis. It's,
right.
You know what I mean? It's like you wouldn't think from now when it's I guess it's Sophia runs it, right? And it's kind of part of the broader trad media sphere, essentially. Not exclusively that, but sort of definitely on that end of the spectrum. So it's kind of it's very interesting to look back. There's some great stuff in their archives. So you were at Crisis briefly, and then was the next thing the pilot?
The next thing was the pilot. I was offered the opportunity to go back home to Boston to edit the newspaper and be the first lay editor since the archdiocese had taken over the newspaper nearly a century earlier. And it was too good an opportunity. Well, it looked at the time like something that would be too good an opportunity to pass up.
Okay, so you're working. Is this, would you say, for the one time in your life in an official capacity for the Catholic Church?
Yes, that's the only time and the last time that I was paid by a diocese, an institution of the Catholic Church.
And what years were you at the pilot?
86 to 89. Again, not a very long stay.
Right. But long enough to get a feel for what that world is like.
Yeah,
so
very much so.
I'll just ask very open-ended, what was it like?
It was strange. You may have gathered from my last answer, it wasn't a wonderful experience. I learned a lot. Actually, I'm just out with this novel, Ghost Runner, and a number of people have said, "Oh, you must have spent a lot of time talking to priests." And that reflects my tenure at the pilot, because I was dealing in a clerical environment. And in an archdiocese, which I think is just ridden with difficulties that involve, well, clericalism, to put it simply. This is an archdiocese where things are as they have been, where the status quo sort of rules the day, and the status quo is the priests. And I was not popular with the priests, which is why it wasn't a long tenure. And that
why
too, because I thought that the archdiocese should have a newspaper. Well, several reasons. First, because I thought the archdiocese should have a newspaper rather than what was really a glorified newsletter. I thought that and in applying for the job, I tried to make this clear, that I thought the people of the Archdiocese of Boston were best served, and the goals of the church, the purpose of the church, were best served by informing people about the faith and issues that touched on the faith, rather than being what a newsletter is. You know, a newsletter is to make people feel good about the institution. Mm-hmm. Your high school, alumni magazine sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Isn't it good that this alumnus did this and this alumnus did that? And by the way, shouldn't you send more money?
Right.
And I think that Catholic journalism, as practiced in diocesan publications, tends to be that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, give you one example. The most popular item in the weekly pilot was the necrology, the list of priests who had died and the dates of their deaths. Mm-hmm. And if the necrology was omitted, we would get pounded with phone calls. Any other topic, however controversial, we wouldn't get that kind of reaction. Huh. And that tells you a lot about the readership and what the readers expected.
Huh. Okay. Any other reasons that you didn't gel well with the clerical environment there?
Yes. Fairly soon after I arrived, I made a bit of a splash. It was news, and to be fair, the archdiocese made a bit of a splash for me. Big deal, lay editor. This was unthinkable.
Oh, you were the first lay editor, right? Yeah, that's worth mentioning.
And I made some headlines with some editorials early on, and the tone of the editorials definitely changed immediately when I got there. But the one that was most provocative was, at the time, there was a gay rights bill before the state legislature, and I wrote a strong editorial against it.
Right.
And the editorial was successful. The State House switchboard was shut down with phone calls, mostly from our readers, and the bill didn't get through that year.
Wow.
I was picketed. The funny thing is, the picket came on a day when I was out of the office, so everybody else was inconvenienced. I wasn't at all. I didn't know it was coming. And I got some death threats, and a number of the clergy of the Boston Archdiocese turned against me. And I didn't know until years later how concerted the effort to get rid of me was from that.
Why did they turn against you for that?
The Lavender Mafia. Right.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. In my mind, the Lavender Mafia isn't always pro-gay marriage per se, so much as they are pro-protecting gays within the church. But in this case, or am I wrong? That's quite interesting to me that they would be that on the nose, in the 80s.
Well, yeah, good point. It may have been that was just the precipitating event, and that at that point they started worrying about me. But
yeah,
as I say, it was years later when I was told by a good friend that he'd been in a meeting where one prominent gay-friendly priest was referring to the former editor of the pilot and said the words were, "We got him."
Okay. Well.
And I think I take his analysis of what happened as accurate.
Right. And so it's not so much that gay marriage is an issue that particularly affects them as that this is a sign of where you're going with your commentary in general,
Exactly. Yeah. And this was long, long before gay marriage was an issue. This was a gay rights bill.
Oh, sorry. So what does that entail then?
Gee, it's so long now. I think it was just making homosexuals one of the protected classes.
I see. Okay.
For anti-discrimination enforcement.
Right. Yeah. In my mind, I just translated that to gay marriage.
Right. Yeah. That's a very recent development.
Right. Although it did happen first in Massachusetts, isn't that right?
Yeah. Yes, it did.
Okay. Very interesting. So, anything else? Any other kind of conflicts or particular issues that were difficult or illustrated because one of the directions we're going here is like switching from that environment to independent Catholic journalism. And
Yeah.
so what? Any other things that kind of illustrated the difference in your experience there, or made you feel frustrated, as opposed to other people wanting you gone, but perhaps making you feel limited or frustrated?
Well, it was difficult. It was frustrating trying to kick the staff and the readership of the Pilot out of the rut that the paper had been in for years. But more than that, I guess, I may be jumping ahead a little bit here, but let me give you an understanding of how this particular newspaper operated.
Okay.
The Pilot, when I came in, had an alleged readership of 50,000. That means 50,000 copies were printed, roughly. And they were bundled up and sent to parishes. In many parishes, the pastor would take the bundle and toss it in the dumpster without opening it. He'd then get a bill from the Pilot for those newspapers, which he would not pay.
Mm-hmm.
So the Pilot was rolling up debts based on a circulation that was really phony. And when I came in, I said, this is pointless. I don't want to continue this. I want it sold to people who want the newspaper. And if I can't sell it, then there's something wrong with me and something wrong with the paper. Mm-hmm. And so I set up a subscription drive to get paid individual subscribers, and it did double the circulation. But by that time, I was already on my way out the door. But the point I want to make here is it was a newspaper that was running at a loss, and it was running at a loss because people weren't interested in reading it. Mm-hmm. And among the people who weren't interested in reading it were the pastors, who were really, in a way, the only people particularly well served by the newspaper.
Okay.
So
fascinating. Yeah.
And I'm going to come back to this when we talk about Catholic World News.
Sure. Well, is there anything else you want to say about the Pilot specifically, or should we move on?
I'll just say this, that the Pilot was founded as a newspaper for Irish immigrants in Boston. And in the 1830s, it was one of the biggest circulation newspapers in the country. So it has a proud heritage.
Wow.
My point here, you can sell a Catholic newspaper. You just have to find a way to appeal to people. And I always thought, look, at the time, we're talking about the 1980s. Well, really, any time in my lifetime, people know that Catholicism is controversial. Catholicism is caught up in some of the most controversial issues of the day. So why not talk about them?
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. Okay. So, what's the overlap with Catholic World Report and Catholic World News in terms of the timeline?
Good. Yes. I was at Catholic World Report for, I guess it was 12 years. You just said so, and I trust you.
I think it was from, I feel like your bio said it was like 1993 to 2005 or something like that.
It's roughly in that area. And I was pretty happy there. It's a monthly international magazine.
Yeah. I love Catholic World Report even today. It's great.
Yeah, I think it has held its identity, well, better than Crisis, for instance. There's less of a change in what you see, I think,
right,
over the years. But it is an international magazine. And at the time, the internet was such a great boon for me, because when I first came on board, everything was done by fax. And, fax machines are the most frustrating form of technology ever invented. Mm-hmm. My daughters will tell you about the times their bedroom was next to my office, and they would hear me banging on the fax machine trying to get it unjam, shouting at it, mm-hmm. and not always in the best language. And I was getting material from literally all over the world by fax. And the problem with a magazine like Catholic World Report is every once in a while you find someone who delivers really good stuff on a somewhat obscure topic.
Mm-hmm.
And you say to yourself, wow, I wish I could use him more often, but after all, how often am I going to have an article on Sri Lanka?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it seemed to me that there was an opportunity there to do more than in a monthly magazine. And the idea that came to my mind, it was during the development of the World Wide Web. I couldn't tell you exactly when.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting an article from a contributor in Siberia, literally Siberia. And I had a couple of questions to ask him, and I sent him questions by email, and he replied by email. So all of that was done within 6 hours, despite the time difference. And
Right.
I said, wow, this is wonderful.
Yeah.
And that was when the light bulb went on over my head, causing a glow on the ceiling, and a reflective glow. And I said to myself, this is the sort of thing that could enable someone to put together a news service that provided news more often than a monthly magazine could use it.
Right.
And my publisher, Father Fessio, said, go with it. So for a while there, I was running both in the infancy of Catholic World News,
Right.
and trying to provide a daily news summary as well as the in-depth articles for the magazine. And at that point, this just to continue the thought I touched on a few minutes ago. At that point, my goal was to compete for space in diocesan newspapers. I thought all these diocesan newspapers that use the official Catholic news service, which was then in operation, run by the bishops, still is sort of, and I would provide them. All they need is a certain number of column inches a week. They want the most important news. I can provide it for them. Mm-hmm. And I was offering it to them at a small fraction of what they were paying Catholic news service. And a grand total of one diocesan newspaper took me up on it. And so just to finish that thought about how the pilot was running on loss, give you an idea of how diocesan newspapers work. Diocesan newspapers were paying at that time what I thought was a huge fee for monthly service of Catholic news service. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to transfer it to my news service for a fraction of the fee, a small fraction, because they were more or less obligated to support Catholic news service. Catholic news service is the official service of the U.S. Catholic Conference the Conference of Catholic Bishops now. And all of the dioceses were paying for Catholic news service. Mm-hmm. The irony is that Catholic news service was also running at a loss. So it was also subsidized by the bishops. Mm-hmm. It no longer is extant. It's only a skeleton left of Catholic news service. But at that time, if you are just a parishioner in the pews, if you see you were subsidizing Catholic news service to run at a loss and sending your money to the bishops to run Catholic news service at a loss so that it could provide material for the newspapers that were running at a loss. And you, when you tossed your envelope into the collection, were contributing to maintain all of these losing operations.
Yeah, so. That's pretty interesting. And so you were working on this developing Catholic World News at the same time as still working at Catholic World Report. And what was it like getting things? I mean, what was it like getting things running online? Because, my dad, who founded Catholic Culture, was kind of, I know a lot of the history of him being kind of like an online Catholic pioneer and teaching himself to program and all this stuff. So what was it like for you? Did you learn any of those skills? Did you have somebody else doing it for you?
I learned none of those skills.
Okay.
And I'm laughing because I am recalling what I think was my first interaction with your father.
Okay.
When I was online in the early days. What was CRNet, or was his service at that point?
I think it was the Catholic Resource Network, which was it was like the first Catholic forum,
right?
Essentially.
And I was trying to do something, and I was very frustrated. You know how when you work at a computer, you try something and it doesn't work, and you try something else. And I was just pounding at the keyboard, trying different things.
Right.
And then a crawl appeared, because, of course, at that time, there were no images. It's just letters, digits.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And the crawl appeared, Jeff Mirris, hello, what are you trying to do? Or something like that. And I realized that there was a human being behind that black box. And he bailed me out. But no, I never developed any sort of programming skills or anything like that.
So, I mean, this is, I guess, the Catholic Resource Network was before the World Wide Web, per se. It was the bulletin board system or whatever it was, which I've never even seen or had any interacted with. You know, I'm old enough to remember DOS, MS-DOS, but I'm not old enough to remember being on the bulletin board system, because that would have gone away by the time I was 6 or something. Right. So what I'm just curious, I'm just asking on a technical level, like, how did your thing work? How did the original 1995 Catholic World News work?
That was all by email. There was no web presence.
It was an email newsletter that was not a website.
That's right.
Okay,
there was no web to be a site on.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And so you're working on that, and that's on a paid subscription basis, right? Right. And that's for several years. At a certain point, you're no longer, well, I guess you would have still been at Catholic World Report pretty much that entire period, overlapping even with Catholic Culture with the merging of Catholic World News with Catholic Culture, right? Did you merge with us when we started at 2003? I said that in the intro, but maybe I was wrong.
Maybe. Because Catholic Culture also, it may have been when the name changed to Catholic Culture. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I may have been wrong. I assumed that you merged with us sort of when we started out, when we rebranded. So it was originally Peter's Net, which started in 1996. petersnet.net, and then there was sort of a reboot as catholicculture.org in 2003, and at some point, or maybe early in that period, you must have joined up.
Exactly. Yes.
And that coincided, I assume, with what did if I may ask, how did your relationship with my dad develop up to that point, from that time that he appeared suddenly on your screen?
Yeah. Now my memory is not serving me well. We both were invited to visit EWTN, and we spoke with Mother Angelica separately.
Because my dad developed their original website, their old website.
Yes. And at the same time, they were talking to me about making Catholic World News a part of the EWTN empire.
Right. Yeah, they were also trying to get my dad to just work for them. Yeah.
Right. And I'm not really remembering. There was a period there where I think we both were working for EWTN. Certainly I was. But maintaining independence, I think both of us were in the same boat. We were contracting for EWTN, but only providing services. And so Catholic World News was providing news for EWTN.
Right.
And then at a certain time, EWTN really wanted in-house service, and neither of us was willing to become a part of that. I wasn't willing to move to Alabama.
My earliest memory of my dad's professional life is him talking about how Mother Angelica wanted him to move to Alabama and work for EWTN, and he didn't want to move us all to Alabama. That's the earliest. I think I was 6 or something, or 8.
Yeah.
It was in the mid to late 90s, and I have a memory of that conversation happening?
Well, I was having the same conversation, and no doubt Jeff and I were talking about this, the two of us talking about this. I don't recall specific conversations, but we were going through the same process. Mother Angelica really felt certain that we should be part of their team and move there and be in residence in EWTN. And I remember, God love her, I think she was a saint. I think I have nothing but admiration for Mother Angelica. But the one time when I had a disagreement with her was when we were talking about this. And she said, "Phil, you can't negotiate with God." And I said, "Mother Angelica, you're right, but right now I'm negotiating with you."
Funny. So you didn't want to go to Alabama. I've been to Alabama once, and for some reason, the first time I ever had sushi was in Auburn, Alabama, which is not a great place to have sushi for the first time. Anyway, that's just a random memory. Back when I went to the Ludwig von Mises summer week-long summer program down there, but in college. But anyway, okay, so you're working along, and you're still on a subscription basis. And what contributes to the decision to merge with my dad's operation?
Oh, well, the subscription basis wasn't working.
I see.
And Catholic Culture made me an offer to come on board. I was at that point, I was looking for someone to buy the service.
Right.
And he gave me the best offer. And it was, from the beginning, a pretty happy partnership.
So do you think it was working less well than it had previously worked? I mean, was it the web had developed enough by that time that people were able to get news for free elsewhere, or what was the issue?
I think probably it was that people early on thought that everything on the internet should be free. And
right. Yeah.
But the subscription basis had never really been viable long term. It was never. There just wasn't enough. When I was running Catholic World News out of my side pocket, it certainly wouldn't have been enough to put food on the table.
Right. I see. Yeah. I mean, this is whenever you merge with us, whether it was 2003 or shortly thereafter, this is the internet becoming recognizable as we know it, pre-social media still. So that massive change hadn't happened yet, but podcasts now exist, although almost nobody knows about them. By the time that
right.
Catholic Culture starts, I think podcast started in like 2001 or something. But anyway, okay, so you're merging, and that it's a way to remain independent, but to not have to just go on your own, I guess, at the same time,
right.
independent
right.
of the institutional church, and with somebody who's like-minded and is going to allow you free reign, more or less.
Yes. And I was very happy with the agreement that we made that gave me editorial control. We had a long series of talks to make sure we were comfortable with each other before we reached that agreement from both sides. And from my perspective, the situation was this, that news is fungible. You can get your news in any number of ways.
Right.
And because you can get it in any number of ways, you're probably going to look for the cheapest way ordinarily that meets your requirements. It's hard to sell news, and I'm not the only one who's discovered this. I mean, all the major media outlets are looking at the same problem. It was, however, news draws eyeballs. And from Catholic Culture's point of view, having a lot of daily news headlines, is a way to bring a lot of readers onto the website frequently and then ask for their support. And that seems to me the best model today still for a lot of news sites, is associate yourself with someone who wants traffic, the sort of traffic that you will bring.
Right.
And they find another way to bring in revenue based on that traffic.
Yeah. And this was, I'm assuming, part of the conversation you and my dad had was that baseline of like, we're going to be faithful to the teachings of the church and things like that, because that was, I suppose, still can't be taken for granted today, but also couldn't be taken for granted back then. I mean, that was
right.
And apparently, based on your experience at the Pilot, one must sometimes be independent of the institutional church precisely in order to be faithful to the magisterium of the church.
That's a good point.
Independent, not in an absolute sense, obviously, not morally, not, you're under the authority of the church, but yes, exactly.
Financially. I am very grateful that since leaving the Pilot, I have been free of financial pressure for anything I said, as long as I wasn't acting irresponsibly. There was no one who was going to say, I'll withdraw my support, I'll cancel my advertising,
right.
I'll fire you.
Right.
I could say what I thought was the truth. Now, I have to say, I think there's an institutional problem, too, with the diocesan newspapers, because if you are the organ of the archdiocese, of course you are going to be leaning towards a sort of boosterism for the archdiocese. And that's why I think it would be preferable to have newspapers, and there are a few, and now there are many more news outlets or Catholic commentary outlets, thanks to the internet, that are independent of that sort of pressure or that sort of temptation to toe the company line. I mean, whenever, as a consumer of news, you want to know who's paying to put this news out. And if the person or entity that's paying to put out the news has an axe to grind, you want to know about that. Even if it's a fairly benign purpose, you still want to know about it. And boy, going through the scandals in the 1990s and early 2000s, the sex abuse scandals, you saw that writ large, where the secular media wanted to use the scandals as an opportunity to bash the church, and they were delighted with that opportunity. And it was a huge opportunity, let's face it.
Yeah.
And therefore, a lot of people were saying, oh, this is a media creation. It's the media out to get the church. Well, it was the media out to get the church, but it wasn't the media creation. And striking the right balance there was, I think, a great service to the church.
Yeah. And were you, when you started at Catholic Culture, were you immediately writing commentary for us as well from the very beginning?
Yes.
So that was part of the deal.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay. Yeah. So, what I want to come back to the abuse crisis. But let me ask this. I mean, what made, by the time you joined up with us, what was it that made Catholic World News different vis-a-vis any other new Catholic online news things that had come up between like 1995 and 2003? Was it essentially the independence, or was there anything else that might have distinguished it as well?
Well, there again, I'm going to be handicapped by my inability to keep dates straight.
Sure.
I don't know which of the news services that's currently on the market was available back in 2003 or so. But I would say that what I would like to think distinguished Catholic World News from other outlets is just what we were saying, that we would take an independent look, we'd be critical, we'd call them as we saw them, but within the context of loyalty to the Catholic faith and to the magisterium, and that we would try not to indulge in what later became known as clickbait. You can get a lot more attention by writing a headline, particularly a headline, but writing a story that's sensationalistic.
Right.
and maybe not being too careful about the facts. But in the long run, I hope that Catholic World News has proven to be the site that you can come to if you want a sober analysis that's going to hold up to scrutiny.
Yes. Okay. So, I mean, we've been talking a lot about the institutional church and the perils of journalism that's directly under the institutional church. Now we're coming to this new internet era, and especially the social media era, but not exclusively that. So now it's in full flower. We've got YouTube, we've got Twitter, we've got all this social media, Facebook, obviously, all stuff that has its benefits, but also which sort of has expanded the incentives for clickbait massively, and so now we've got this independence is no longer a rarity. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Now, for serious professional journalism, it may be still a mix of independent and non-independent sources, right? But in terms of commentary and people attempting to break stories in a sort of a casual way, then its independence is extremely common. And you might say that we have as much of the independence being a problem as the the accountability being a problem.
Right. Yes.
So how do you how do you navigate that? I mean, especially when there's sites that are clearly sensationalistic and not responsible. And I don't know if this is so much the case anymore, but there was a period when some of those sites, who shall remain nameless, were still seeming to break important stories that most other people weren't talking about. So you still kind of had to pay attention to them. I don't know that that's still the same, that all those sites are, even that important anymore. But because you've got the Pillar and such breaking these, these abuse stories and different things. But how do you kind of, let's say when you were looking as editor of Catholic World News, drawing things from stories other people have broken, how did you kind of evaluate those things when they were coming from sources that clearly were kind of slanted and clearly were sensationalistic, but we're still reporting on something that seemed to be real?
Yeah, that's a challenge. And it's a challenge that's not really new to journalism. I mentioned that I was, back in the day, I was expecting to teach political theory, and I particularly had an interest in the American founding. And if you read about the American founding, read about the pamphlets and the broadsides and the newspapers that were available at the time of the founding. And a lot of the stories were lurid, sensationalistic, completely irresponsible. And I think not all that unlike what you find online today. Every bit as sensationalistic. And then after a while, in the early days of the American Republic, the media sobered up somewhat. Now, why? I think it's because people learned what they could trust and what they couldn't trust, and the institution, to some extent, policed itself. And in the age of the internet, we haven't learned yet how to police ourselves, and consumers of news haven't yet learned how to look for a reliable and trustworthy source. And it will take some time. But I think these things will sort themselves out. I really, really dislike the sensationalistic approach because it makes it more difficult for all the rest of us. When we do break a big story, and your natural reaction as a reader is to say, oh, I wonder if this is more clickbait. So we're paying for it too, even though we try our best not to indulge in it. But there are standards of journalism. As we're speaking, a lot of people involved in Catholic journalism or consumers of Catholic journalism are mourning the death of John Allen, who was the founder of the Crooks website. And I think he is a fine example of good journalism in that he was independent, an independent voice. He had his own opinions, with which I sometimes disagreed, sometimes strongly. But if John Allen told you something had happened, you knew it had happened. And if he told you someone had said something, you knew that person had said that thing. He was reliable. And
yeah,
here's a standard of opinionated journalism that I think he adhered to. You could take a column he wrote and disagree with his conclusions, but based on the facts as he presented them, reach a different conclusion yourself.
Right.
Because the facts were there.
Right.
And that's fair. That's responsible. And that helps everybody involved.
Yeah. Yeah. It is striking. There is a lot of Catholic. How important is the training? The journalism school, that kind of stuff. I mean, you did political philosophy, so you didn't. I guess you didn't have formal journalistic training.
Not a bit.
But you came up in a time when there were these institutions that had been formed by that kind of tradition, I guess.
Yeah. As I was growing up, there were standards. There were journalistic standards. Today, if I were hiring journalists, I think you would not want to come to me with a resume touting your experience as an honored graduate of a journalism school, a recent graduate, because I don't know what they're doing there, but the standards of journalism have definitely taken a tumble. Right. In my lifetime. And when I tell you about my attitude towards the reporting of John Allen, I would say the same to a lesser extent about, say, the New York Times in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. They had a slant, but if you adjusted for the slant, you could rely on the facts. Usually there are exceptions, such as the New York Times reporter who denied the Ukrainian famine, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And journalism today has become so fractured, so partisan, that it's contributing to the problem that we're talking about. And it's not just that the internet has created it. It's that the media in their response have fed into the problem. So it's really the Wild West out there. And
right.
You need a reliable guide. And I guess part of the service that I thought I was providing for people in Catholic World News is it's only occasionally that I came up with news that you couldn't have dug out yourself if you spent enough time.
Right.
But you don't have all day to do it. And it's my job. So if you are willing to trust me, here's your news summary.
I guess one thing I'm wondering about is with this, proliferation of news sources online, in Catholic social media, etc. One of the problems is a vice problem, is that people are looking to make money, they're looking to get clicks, and they are pushing their agenda, and they're using news as entertainment. So there's vice on the reader's side and on the writer's side, or YouTuber's side, whatever. But what I'm wondering is, is virtue enough? So, in other words, is there there's got to be, I'm assuming that there's also just a certain sort of a certain code, a certain protocol of being a real journalist, a real reporter that you follow, and that you can't just come up with that reinventing the wheel on your own, that there has to be some kind of tradition or some kind of training for that end of it. Even if you're the most moderate, balanced, and objective person in the world, that there's just certain things that you don't do. I mean, to take a crazy example, the whole Pachamama thing happened. Taylor Marshall broke the story of the guy throwing the Pachamama in the river. We later found out that Taylor Marshall had paid that guy and flown him out there to do that, and then broke the story as though he was completely independent of what happened. And so that doesn't mean that Pachamama didn't deserve to get thrown in the river. I don't know. I'm not saying either way, but what I'm saying is that doesn't seem exactly like journalist kosher from a journalistic practices perspective.
No, that's activism. And that's another problem that at what point, if you're a good journalist, you're not part of the story yourself. Mm-hmm. And I, having spent a fair amount of time in my youth in politics, I have a great respect for activists and for publicists, but that's a different story. That's a different line of work. And if you blur the lines, then you're causing trouble for everybody involved. There is definitely some standards that I think should be universal and generally are. For instance, you should not blow a source. You know, if someone speaks to you in confidence, you should maintain that confidence. And I've always been very scrupulous about that.
Right.
One thing that people are not nearly so scrupulous about is quotations.
Okay.
To me, anything inside quotation marks must be precisely what the person said, not your interpretation of what the person said, and not your belief, recollection of what the person said. It was astonishing and outrageous to me that some of the most shocking quotes from Pope Francis were essentially cooked up by that Italian journalist who did not take notes or record the conversations. He just remembered what he thought the Pope had said. Well, that's astonishing to me that you could get away with that. Right.
Yeah. What about leaking things? Like, what's the ethics on that kind of stuff? You know, documents that are not supposed to be public yet, or the Pope is going to do this in 2 days, that kind of stuff. What's the ethics on that?
I think we all like leaks because leaks provide scoops, and we all love our scoops. And, you remember the time you beat everybody to a story. And I don't have a problem ordinarily with leaks as long as it's not something that's leaked illegally or unethically.
I see.
If you are a party, if you're a White House aide and I take you out to lunch and you start talking more than you should, that's, as far as I'm concerned, fair game and a good story.
Right. So that's on them. That's on them, essentially.
Yeah. Unless if it's a matter of national security, maybe I'd think twice about it.
Right.
On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, after every papal conclave, you wait a couple of weeks and you see the books coming out about what happened during the conclave. Now, during the conclave, every one of the cardinals took a solemn oath multiple times not to tell what happened in the conclave. So I, as a matter of principle, don't pay attention to those books because these sources have declared themselves to be unreliable.
Right.
And probably they're giving a reasonably clear picture of what happened, at least from their perspective, but I don't trust them.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Stepping back to the abuse, and you're reporting on clerical abuse over the decades. So you mentioned 90s. Most people, this was on their radar in the early 2000s. So you were already paying attention to this before other people were, because of your inside view of things as a Catholic journalist. You were aware that this was going to be a problem and this was going to become a bigger crisis.
Yes. Way before, people assumed that I took an interest because I was living in Boston when Boston became ground zero in 2002.
Right.
In fact, if you look back at Catholic World Report, you would see a cover issue about clerical sex abuse. I think it was in 1994. It was on the cover. because I had just heard enough stories to recognize that this was bigger than we then realized, that it wasn't just sort of an epiphenomenon involving a few very disturbed priests, that it was much more widespread, and that at least some people in the hierarchy knew. I had no idea at that point how many knew. And I remember a moment, and I couldn't tell you exactly when it was, but it was a few years after that, when wonderful Catholic broadcaster, radio host Al Cresta, God rest him, had me on to talk about this, and he asked me, how big a deal is this? And it was very obvious to me that Al expected me to say, not a big deal. And I said, I think it's going to be the greatest crisis for the church since the Reformation. And he was bowled over. He remembered it. And I remembered saying it. And at the time, I said, wow, what did I just say? But looking back, I don't think I was wrong.
So what kind of feedback from the institutional church did you get, let's say in the 90s when you're dealing with this, before it's coming out in such a mainstream way that nobody can ignore it anymore?
Well, the first feedback was about what you'd expect, critical, saying, why are you playing into this media conspiracy? Don't take it seriously. We have all this under control.
Yeah.
But really the more disturbing reaction was just not talking about it. That was a point where some clerics, some prelates who had previously spoken with me freely decided they didn't want to talk to me as much, or didn't want to talk about that subject. And it was a see no evil approach. And
right.
Eventually that broke down somewhat, but it took a toll. I mean, it took a toll on my reporting.
Yeah. Now, when this came out in a big way in 2002, did you find that you were more prepared to sort of hit the ground running in your coverage because you had already been following this, whereas maybe other Catholic media was kind of in panic mode?
Very much so, because I already had sort of decided how I was going to handle this. I already had a lot of information. You know, a lot of the business of reporting is you're running down stories and trying to see if a lead that you've come up with is accurate or not. And at any given time, you have a lot of potential stories in the back of your head, but you're not sure which will pan out. So I already had a fair amount of information in my files. And I was already talking with victims and with representative of victims.
Right.
So I think I was way ahead of the game, yes.
Yeah. I'm going to skip ahead to, what was it, 2018 or 2019, that the next sort of wave hit. It was a little bit before COVID. And the nature of that sort of renewed wave of abuse scandals, which I think was a highly significant moment in the American church and in Catholicism in social media, because I think it was at that time that a lot of Catholics became, who had been faithful for the preceding 2 decades, became actively hostile towards the clergy. And that sort of became normalized. That attitude became really normalized. I don't think it was Amoris Laetitia. I don't think it was any, I think that was when things really, that and then COVID, when things really, really broke down in a serious way. Was that, the nature of that scandal? I mean, people were talking about the Pennsylvania grand jury report, I seem to remember. Am I right in thinking that was not really news? What was news was, what did the bishops know? It was more McCarrick. What was really new was that the episcopal level and the papal level of it, rather than the fact that we found out a bunch of, more priests who abused kids but it was still mostly decades ago.
Yes. Yes. And there again, I think I was ahead of the story because in the book, which you were kind enough to mention, The Faithful Departed, I said that there were 3 levels to the scandal. First, there was the level of a small percentage of priests, a large number, but a very small percentage of priests who did unspeakable crimes. Second was the protection afforded to them by the prevalence of homosexuality in the clergy.
Right.
And third was, to me, in my mind, the biggest scandal of all, that the bishops had protected them. And it was not a small percentage of bishops. It was most of the bishops. And that had not been addressed.
Yeah.
And the McCarrick scandal brought that out very, very forcefully and extended it, which at that point, unfortunately, it was almost an inevitable conclusion. It extended right up to the Vatican. And this, we have not seen the end of this yet, because we have not seen accountability on the part of all of the hierarchy.
Right. Would you agree with me that this moment really marks a change in Catholic public discourse as well? I mean, it really does seem to me that this was the moment when a lot of Catholics sort of like gave themselves permission, in a sense, to not respect the hierarchy anymore.
I guess I'd partly agree with you. I think it began more around 2002, but this was another punch.
Right.
But
I was 12 in 2002, and it didn't really hit me that hard. I remember people making stupid jokes in school and stuff, but it wasn't something that really affected me at all. And then 2018, 2019 felt like this whole new thing to pick off people who had managed to stay faithful to the church throughout what had happened before, or people who were too young to have really been affected by it, to really demoralize those people.
Yeah, I guess I was older, so I would not make it quite as dramatic as that. I think it was, as I say, 2002, we had the people who wanted to criticize the Catholic Church, whether they call themselves Catholic or not, had a golden opportunity to say whatever they want. And anytime the Catholic Church issues a statement on anything, the response is, well, yeah, but look at what you did to the altar boys. And and it's sort of a shut up moment.
That's right. Yeah.
And when the McCarrick scandal broke, that extended all the way up to Rome. And yes, it was and remains devastating. And the whole problem of the scandal arose, as far as the bishop's involvement is concerned, arose largely because bishops and their staff thought it was best to quiet things down, not pay attention to this, because it might cause scandal. Well, you look back now and you say, how did that work out?
Yeah.
Because it caused, the cover-up is worse than the crime.
Right. Yeah.
And particularly for this reason, that in 2002, early on, or 1990 something for me, we learned that there are priests who do bad things.
Right.
Well, if you're a Catholic, you already know that. You know about sin. There's nobody who doesn't do bad things.
Right.
And the Catholic Church is an authority on sin.
Right.
But what I was not ready for at first was to find out that bishops, not to put too fine a point on it, lied. And if you think about how you trust your faith came to you from people who you trusted.
Right.
And if you can't trust the bishops as teachers of the faith, that really strikes at the heart of the faith.
Yeah. I think that insofar as there's I think that the idea that a large number of bishops fundamentally do not have the same interests as the mass of the faithful, certainly of the strongly believing faithful, was really reinforced in 2018, 2019, and then 2020. And it's not entirely fair. People speak too broadly about the bishops as though they're all the same, and it's certainly with regard to how they responded to COVID, there were a whole range of responses. But I'm just talking about the perception with which there's some truth, and then, with Traditionis Custodes, obviously that also creates all this hostility and division. But I think that is riding on. I think that the renewal of the abuse crisis in, I think it was 2018, provides the groundwork for Catholics to be more upset by some of those later things than they otherwise would be. Not by COVID, but Traditionis Custodes is a good example, I think, because I think a lot of people were pushed in a traditionalist direction by what happened in 2018. There's not necessarily a logical connection between the two things, but I think that people were just they're thinking, I don't trust our bishops, so what else don't I trust them about? And I think that you had the new traditionalist media around that time. I had mentioned Taylor Marshall and, middle-aged, Republican Catholic mothers who wouldn't have otherwise particularly cared about the liturgy suddenly got interested in it because it was another evidence that, the hierarchical church is not faithful. I'm not trying to say that in a cynical way because the liturgy is very important. But I think that people who wouldn't have otherwise been particularly interested or tuned into those kinds of issues were pushed in that direction by what happened on the face of it, an unrelated issue, in 2018. And then, of course, with COVID.
Yeah, well, I think I could put the same sort of idea in a different, more positive form, that if you have begun to look critically at what the bishops are doing and you say, well, what they're doing is not in line with the traditions of the church, with the doctrines of the faith, then where do we look for the stability that we once felt? And so that leads you back towards tradition, and tradition in liturgy as well.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think there's positive and negative aspects to both of these. I mean, if you look at Pope Francis, right, like, obviously the fact that this strange combination of the Pope Francis era and the Trump era, the latter of which has not ended yet, pushing people to question standard conservative ideas in politics and religion, I think that's a very healthy thing. I mean, there's a reevaluation of the status quo, even in the sort of a conservative sense. On the other hand, a lot of people go off the deep end, and you said it's the Wild West out there, and a lot of that Wild West is this crisis of credibility, this crisis of elites, this crisis of authority, again, both in politics and religion, that has happened. And obviously there's a tremendous amount of damage and chaos that's created as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely agree with you there. It's been very rough on a lot of people, and the cost is going to be measured in souls, and that is tragic on just a huge level. I have to say also, because I don't want to come off sounding as negative as this conversation might seem, that I have seen through my years in covering matters of the church, so many people who, despite the problem, are exemplars of the faith, and
no doubt, including priests,
for sure,
yeah,
and attract people to them. And I guess Here's the thing that is frustrating to me in a sort of good way as a journalist, that if you look at the way we were brought up to measure the success of the faith in terms of Sunday Mass attendance, in terms of vocations to the priesthood, and dollars in the collection, ability of church leaders to, ability of Catholics to make themselves heard on the political level.
Right.
All of those have been trending down for most of my lifetime.
Right.
And yet, at the same time, I just see, as I wander through the Catholic world, some extraordinary signs of growth in the church, and often in the most unexpected places. I mean, just to give you one example that we've already mentioned, Huntsville, Alabama. EWTN came out of nowhere.
Right.
It makes no sense. It's now a huge influence. The homeschooling movement has made just a spectacular impact, and the homeschooling movement tends to create little communities, not geographical communities, but communities of people who have the same interests, support each other, their children get to know each other. They all live the faith together, and living in one of those communities now, I can testify that it draws people to it. It's like we're also blessed to be in a very good parish, and the parish draws people into the parish, and then they mingle with the people in this homeschooling community and, cross-pollinate, as it were. I see that as the future of the church.
You're retiring. You've just retired, I should say, from editor-in-chief of Catholic World News at CatholicCulture.org. That's still continuing, though. Catholic World News will continue, and so there's no there's no cease of that. But you're continuing to write commentary for us, but you're also doing stuff at your Substack. Can you talk about your activities there on your own platform?
Yeah, just before I do, let me also say that I've been fortunate through the years that I've been working at Catholic World News. I've always found that there are people who would work behind the scenes without bylines.
Right.
And let me take all the credit. And for reasons of their own, sometimes they don't want to be acknowledged, and that's okay with me. And so I hope that the Catholic World News coverage will continue, and I don't expect that it will go downhill. My Substack is more, I write about whatever I feel like writing about. And you write about what you know, so I'm still writing a great deal about the Catholic Church, but I'm also writing about specifically political stuff. I'm not afraid to be more partisan because it's just me. I'm not representing any institution.
Right.
I'm also writing about, it's not the season for it now, but beekeeping,
Nice.
which is a hobby of mine. Writing more recently about quantum theory, with which I've become obsessed, even though I don't understand it.
Okay.
But I feel better about that because the very best quantum theorists also will tell you they don't understand it. Mm-hmm. And I try to be funny. Sometimes we are recording just as the world braces for what looks like a very big snowstorm. And as someone who spent most of my life in New England, I have to say that I find it funny how people panic. I mean,
Sure.
It's snow. It's winter. It's going to snow. Get
Sure.
used to it.
Yeah, and you do stuff with your wife there too, right?
Yes. Lila is also prolific on Substack, and we have a weekly podcast, The Homefront, which
Great.
We enjoy doing, and some people enjoy listening.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll link to all of those things.
Thank you.
And well, Phil, it's been great to, we've been technically co-workers for, I guess, over a decade, but, mostly not interacting that much for much of that time. But, since I took over Catholic Culture a couple of years ago, we've had more occasion to talk on the phone and right. For me to pick your brain about things. So I've appreciated that. And I always have a sense of like, well, there's people at this website who've been at it longer than I have. And so I'm just going to let them do their thing. And, I'm very happy to have them. And you're definitely chief among those people, you and my dad, obviously. So it's nice to be able to talk to you about these things and get the benefit of your experience. So, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a good occasion to look back and remember things, even if I don't remember the dates they happened.
All right, everybody, you can go to catholicculture.org to see everything that Phil writes for us and to his Substack, which I'll link to in the show notes. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next time.
The Catholic Culture Podcast is a production of catholicculture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Jim Papandrea, Catholic Culture audiobooks bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and Criteria, the Catholic film podcast featuring deep analysis of great films from a Catholic perspective. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical year resources, and much more at catholicculture.org.